And we're going to connect. Thank you, Nathan. And we're going to connect around a 6-word story. Has anyone ever done a 6-word story before? It is a strategy that is you. Okay, I see some smiles and some head nods. Awesome. So we've done this before. Some of us it may be new for some of us, but I just want us to pause and really reflect on our ideal school year and see if you can capture that feeling, that vision, in a sentence using only 6 words. Okay. So think about your ideal school year and try to capture that in a sentence using only 6 words. I'm going to give us 30 seconds to jot down our thoughts. And once you have it, once the timer is up, I encourage you to just jot that sentence in the chat. Okay. Sorry, it started again. Do we need more time? Are we pretty good to go? Okay. If you have something ready and don't mind sharing it in the chat, please do so. Sorry, it started again. Anyone, someone, anyone? Let's see. I see some. Love it. Oops, sorry. Moving around. Get back to it. Oh, these are wonderful. All of my students showed growth, an engaging, creative growth, achieving year. Students engaged, motivated, smiling, teachers satisfied, supporting students and teachers all year, having fun while engaging my students. Right, we want to enjoy our work too. It would be easy, stress-free experience. Awesome. Thank you all for taking the time to reflect on that. And I really do want us, well, my desire for today is to leave you with some strategies that can support you in attaining that ideal vision for your school year. So I appreciate you sharing that with me. All right, so moving on. Before we, well, actually, let's just jump in with some definitions. So the title of the workshop is Personalizing Instruction Through Flexible Grouping Structures. And I just want us to come to a shared understanding of personalized learning first. And so when I speak about personalized learning, I'm really referring to a learner-centered instructional approach that addresses students' strengths, needs, and interests. A learner-centered instructional approach that addresses each student's strengths, needs, and interests. And what I mean by, well, first, what comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase learner-centered? I know it's used pretty frequently now, but what comes to mind for you when you hear that phrase? You can feel free to just jot that in the chat as well. If it's a word, if it's a few words that come to mind when you hear learner-centered. And student focused. Oh, and there's some more 6-word stories too. Thank you all. Keep them coming. Wow. This might have been the 6-word story, but I think that this also addresses learner-centered, students loving learning in our classroom. That's exactly what learning-centered is, our classroom. That's what comes to mind for me. Project-based learning, teacher as a facilitator. Yes, Claire. Learners having power over their learning. Yes, empowering our learners is a huge part of the learner-centered experience. Students taking control or being responsible for their learning. That as well, Tamara. Yes, all of these things. And so when we're talking about addressing each student's strengths, needs, and interests, If we layer that with these definitions and descriptions that you put in the chat, with students taking control, being responsible, we then begin to recognize that personalized learning is the responsibility of everyone in the classroom. It's not only the teacher figuring out each student's needs and interests and strengths and desires and goals. It's providing space for students to be able to self-identify what those needs are as well. And that's a part of the empowerment, giving space for students to reflect on their goals, on their strengths, on their growth areas, to become aware of them, and then also to access the resources that they need in order to move towards those goals. So the other word or group, the other phrase that we used in this workshop title is flexible grouping. And when we're talking about flexible grouping, we're really referring to dynamic groups. Dynamic groups. Dynamic groups where various considerations are taken into, are factored in. Of course, the strengths, the growth areas, the interests, and it's so that for the goal to better serve the needs of all students. And so dynamic grouping, it could mean that the group members change frequently. Like students are not going to know, I'm always going to be in the group with Sarah and Chris and Jen. No, the membership in the group changes frequently. The size of the group might also change. We could be leveraging whole group instruction. There is a place for whole group instruction. We could also be leveraging small group stations, leveraging partner work, right? Peer collaboration and coaching, and then also individual work. And when we're leveraging individual work, we might also be incorporating technology so that students can progress through the learning at their own pace. So flexible, we're thinking stretchy groups. It's not static. There are multiple considerations that we take into place when we're designing these groups. So the reason why I say that is because, yes, there is a place for a whole group. I do not want to give whole group instruction a bad rap because it is important and there is a place for it. But when we look at pictures like this, it's pretty easy to see who's at the center here. The educator is at the center, right? The learning is happening at the same pace. The teacher is the one who's driving what's happening and when it happens. So we really want to think about ways that we can restructure models like this to accommodate personalization. And one way to do that, we already discussed it, is to think about how we're grouping students. We're seeing here that students are at the center here. Thinking about ways that we can incorporate small group learning structures, how we can leverage tech tools where students can access their learning and progress at their own pace, and also where they can collaboratively problem solve with their peers. And what this really does and what this means is that we are, and someone said in the chat earlier, we're talking about agency. We're talking about giving students opportunities to participate in key decisions in their own learning experience. I want to name that this is not easy. Oftentimes we're concerned about students making the right decisions or the best decisions for themselves. And that's why giving them space to start to exercise that muscle where they're building metacognitive awareness is so key when we're talking about personalized instruction. We know that our ability to exercise agency is a key component in thriving in today's workforce because you have to learn how to learn. There's a lot of information that's readily available, but knowing the strategies that are best for ourselves is a key characteristic that our students are going to need, that self-awareness. And not only is it good for students, it's good for us as teachers. Someone mentioned this earlier. When we're thinking about personalization, we're thinking about the teacher moving from primarily lecturing. There is a place for lecture, but from moving from primarily lecturing to learning alongside our students, learning from our students. Every year we get a new group of students. We're students of our students, learning the unique needs of the learners that are in front of us. As a coach, as a collaborator, a designer of the learning experience, a facilitator, and of course, as a data analyst. And not only are we operating in those in those capacities, but we're also modeling for our students how they can operate in each of these roles for themselves and for their peers. How can students operate as peer mentors and coaches in the classroom, collaborate, help to design the learning experience, facilitate learning experiences in small groups, and also have opportunities to analyze their own data, right? For self-assessments or peer assessments. So we're really empowering everyone. And I love, again, how I forgot who mentioned it in the chat, our classroom, empowering everyone to step into this role. And so an example of how this shift can look, or some components of how this shift can look, comes out of the competency collaborative. And what they really discuss is how we can shift from a traditional approach to one that empowers students. And the examples that they give are on the left, where the first one, the teacher knows the learning goals, the criteria for success, but might or might not share those goals with students. And when we're shifting to a way of a practice that empowers students, we're looking at shared learning outcomes that include explicit, measurable, relevant, transferable skills and knowledge that support student agency. So those goals, those criteria, it's everywhere. It's kind of like we pulled back the curtain of our lesson planning so that students can see everything that we're working towards together. The other example is in the traditional approach, emphasis may be on covering topics and content more than learning and applying transferable skills. And the age-old question for most of us growing up, as well as our current students, is when am I going to use this in the real world? Why does this matter to me, right? When am I going to use this? I remember there was a conversation on social media a few years ago, like I still haven't used the Pythagorean theorem, right? So people really want to know, why does this matter to me? And so we want to think about how students can learn and apply discipline-specific and transferable skills and knowledge, as well as skills and habits and mindsets that can support them in success across different areas of life. So coupling those discipline-specific skill sets with life skill sets that matter to them. Right. So these are different ways that we can begin to empower our students in shifting to a more learner-centered environment. All right. So now let's take a look at some structures that can support this. One of that I like to start with is the station rotation. I think it might be one of the most known blended learning models. Just put a 1 in the chat if you've tried station rotation in your teaching practice before. Oh, I see the chat lighting up. Okay. Yes. Okay. Quite a few ones. Awesome. So that means we have some experts in the room who I would welcome to share some of their experience as I just briefly discuss station rotation. But when we're talking about the stations, we see that there's normally 3. You can do less. But it starts with the teacher-led station where there might be some reteaching, a mini lesson, an initial assessment. There's an offline station where there is a lot of collaboration happening. There could be labs, capstone projects, other group projects, even peer assessments that are happening in that offline collaborative station. And then in the online station, which we also call the individual station, there could be some self-paced learning that's happening, some self-assessment and reflection, as well as just maybe even a playlist that we want to incorporate. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. If you're new to stations, we would also suggest that maybe you just start with 2 stations so it doesn't feel overwhelming when it comes to planning. And if you're concerned about the size of the groupings, you can just double up, right? There could be 2 online stations so that the groups are a little bit smaller, and 2 offline stations. So you're breaking them up into smaller groups, but also remembering that you can include student input as to what is going on, what the specific learning activities are in these stations that align with the overall learning objective. What I'd like to do now is just show a brief video of what station rotation, station teaching can look like. And I'm going to show a video of an elementary school just because um, when I talk about stations, there's often pushback like younger students aren't ready, they can't handle the agency. And I just want to show an example of how this can look in an elementary school. As we watch the video, I invite you to look at the role of the teacher versus the role of the student, especially with respect to the slide that we just discussed and teachers shifting from lecturer to learner, collaborator, facilitator. So what's the role of the teacher and the student? And then also, let's look at some of the grouping strategies the teacher is using and what data informs that. Okay, here we go.
So the impact of differentiation, the students feel successful. They feel supported. They know if something is difficult for them, there's something that's a little more in line with their strengths coming up soon. So it really makes education fun and approachable. I really think it's the most effective way that I have seen to teach.
The vision and the mission of Highlander is to use innovative practice as a social catalyst. We want our kids to be able to do anything any other kid from Providence could do.
We use differentiation all across the curriculum here at Highlander, and especially in the first grade. Although the content is the same, having the stations really allows me to tailor my lessons to each individual group of learners. So how the differentiation looks in my classroom, we start off with a whole group lesson. So let's get our reading glasses on. Let's get the letter part of our brains activated. This section of our curriculum, we have been looking at nonfiction texts. When we were looking at our book today, we're going to be thinking about where we can get information. And then in the phonics realm, we focused on contractions. We're taking two words and what are we sticking them together with? Apostrophe. Yes, Karen. And then we break off into our small groups. So our yellow group is still learning how to do a lot of our literacy things. The green group is doing pretty well, but has a few things to work on still. And our blue group is hitting all the first grade standards and needs to be stretched. So our differentiation kind of takes two forms. The first is by student grouping, and the second is by modality of learning. We have 20 minutes per station, and there are 3 of the stations. The students will rotate through all 3 stations each day.
So our first station for the blue group is the computer station.
The students use a Google form to check in. They'll normally watch a video or carefully observe a photograph and answer some questions about that.
We watched a video about how to grow a seed. We had to type in our favorite part, then why.
After they finish that form, they can check out an ebook.
And then you could do this game of reading called Teacher Must Know How to Read.
We're delivering things in a way that is visual, that is auditory, that is individual to the students through the technology.
After that, she rings the bell.
Clean up, switch up, first grade readers.
We switch to the sort station.
Our sort station is more of a physical modality. They're using their bodies, which is so important for first graders. They need to move. Kids are cutting out the words, they're gluing them down.
We had a contraction game. It's fun because it's all mixed up and you had to find the right pieces. And then after we do that, we do rainbow writing.
That's another way that we differentiate. If students are able to get through more work, then they have some freedom of choice. Clean it up, switch it up. The last station, we're talking to each other and learning from each other. So that's more of the social interaction type of modality.
I like the teacher station because we get to be with Miss Gallagher and we get to learn cool stuff.
So take a look at the illustrations on this page, right? Now the content is the same, but it can be differentiated in a number of ways. My blue group, for example, they know what text is. They know what illustrations are. And so for them, I create a Venn diagram.
You need to make one circle like this, and then you put another circle overlapping.
Oh, for the yellow or the green group, I'm just leaving the Venn diagram out of it. We're still doing essentially the same thing, but just that piece that might be confusing to some of those students, I just leave that out for a later time. They'll get to it. All right, so clean up and meet me in the middle of the road for writing. Nice work, first grade.
Being able to move through those stations, it's just another level of helping the students learn as much as they can each year. They really feel excited when they make that growth.
They're proud of themselves. They feel like they're effective learners. As a teacher, honestly, it is a lot of work, but the results that you see and the happy faces of the kids and the good feeling that you have in the classroom is worth it.
All right. Thank you all for watching that video with me. I do want to open it up for any reflections that you may have based on the role of the teacher, the roles of the students, and then what data she used to group students, or just any other reflections that you may have. So feel free to drop them in the chat. And there's also it's not a terribly large group. So if it's just easier to unmic and share, please feel free to do that. This is our space.
I like how she had the students rotating through the stations. I love how she had them grouped. It's just giving me some ideas about how, because I teach first grade also. So it's giving me ideas of how to, because I like how she has the green, red, and yellow. I usually do my stations, I name my groups my favorite candy. So and the kids like that. But I love how she had the modality group and, you know, the teacher center group, because I never really thought of it just like that. I kind of did it towards like activities, but I love how she has like, okay, this group you're going to move, you're going to cut, you're going to pace. I like that. So I'm going to steal that.
Yes. Oh, I'm so Tamara, is that how you say your name?
It's Tamara.
Tamara, I had it right the first time. Tamara. Tamara, I love that this was so aligned with the work that you're doing. That's fantastic. And you already have a shout out in the chat. Yeah, Yapin was saying that the candy idea is great.
Yeah.
So please keep sharing those strategies. Thank you for kicking us off. Any other reflections? The role of the student versus the role of the teacher, the data that the teacher used for groupings, or even, as Tamara stated, some of the learning activities that she included with the different modes. All right. Well, feel free to continue to share if anything comes to mind, okay? Continue to share in the chat. So that we can keep the conversation going. Like Tamara, I did also appreciate how she named the groups. Multimodal learning is so important. I also wanted to share, Tamara, I worked at an elementary school in New York for a while, and one of our goals was to engage kinesthetic learners, specifically because we saw a lot of our boys were up and jumping and moving around. So we would do a lot of math with poly spots. Especially as they were learning addition and subtraction, just to get them up and moving. So there's really so many ways that we can think about achieving our learning objectives. There's a lot of ways, there's a lot of entry points, and collaboration is a way that really helps us to start to think outside of the box. So I appreciate your reflection. See someone else in the chat, Kimberly. How can you make sure the groups are on task? I work with a group of 5th to 8th grade. Oh yeah, I remember middle school too, but I have groups that are doing independent work. Okay, this is great. Well, there were a lot of people who named that they have done station teaching before. So I do want to open up the floor if there's anyone who'd like to share strategies with Kimberly on keeping students on task in the groups. Something that you may have tried.
One way that works for me is I use Class Dojo, but my Class Dojo is tied to our classroom store. So if I see a particular group that's working on task, then I'm like, oh my gosh, shout out to this group. You guys get dojos, because they want to earn those points so that they can shop in the store on Friday. So
Oh,
that's one of the ways that, I kind of make sure everyone's on task.
oh, wow. Okay. So you have some incentives. There's some type of maybe school bucks or something that they can use to purchase that you've instituted.
Yeah. And
That's
another way is the group, like the way I have it set up, I have the teacher group, and then I have another small table next to that. The group that I know that may tend to get off task, I put that group close to me so that I can monitor them.
Mm. Okay, so proximity, how you're using the physical space in order to make sure that students are on task. Thank you. Also see in the chat a checklist or task card, so they have to get the task signed off on. Thank you, Claire. I was also going to say that at the end of each station, having some type of quick assessment that they'll have to complete so that we know that they finished the work, and also so that we can know where they are in their progression, right? So before they rotate to the next station, there's a quick mini assessment that they complete. That's been helpful. And then also to your point, Tamara, I'm even wondering about, in this grouping model, how do we decide the sequence where students start first? Maybe there's some students who we know are going to need a little bit of support with getting started. They're going to start with the teacher station. There might be some students who love learning in community. They'll go to the collaborative station first. And some students who are like, hey, I just want to do this by myself. I need time to myself. And then we could put them in the online station. So even thinking about how we are, how we're grouping and where they start in the sequence. Nathan, playlists work great too. Yes, they do, Nathan. Absolutely. We're going to touch on it a little bit later. But I do just want to open it up in case there's just one other person who'd like to share a strategy with Kimberly. Anyone else? And if so, feel free to drop it in the chat. Okay, thank you all. That was a nice discussion. So I didn't realize I had it on the other slide, but this is, oh, fantastic, Kimberly. So I wanted to pose to the group what data points would inform your grouping for this model, right? Are there other things that you would consider when grouping students? I think we kind of started going into that conversation and sharing strategies with Kimberly, but are there other considerations that you would take into place as you're grouping students? And feel free to drop it in the chat or to unmic. I think some common ones when it comes to grouping would be assessment data, right? But maybe even, let's see, what do we have in the chat? Core phonics, okay. Thank you, Brenda. I don't know how many teachers do at the beginning of the year, just like those profiles of a student or student interest, like understanding a little bit more about what students like. Maybe just taking information from that as well. Like we know some students, they just love videos, right? So then we want to incorporate that as an option of how they can access their learning. We saw in the video that there were also those kinesthetic opportunities, right? Tactile learners. So just really understanding what our students enjoy and providing those options. Might even consider some language goals and grouping students according to that. So there's a lot of different data points that we can consider. And then now that we've identified those data points, thinking about the instructional strategies that we'll employ. I'm not going to belabor that point because we started talking about that a little bit. And what I'd like for us to get to are some grouping options. So I think the most common one is on like skill level, right? Group students based on skill level so that we can help them to really progress and meet them where they are. And that is a very important grouping strategy, but there's also some other ways we can think about how we group students. There's a lot of other ways that we can think about how we group students. The group dynamic, how well do they work together? And Kimberly, I know you were talking about middle school. That can be the age where we start to see a little friction between students and friendships, and they're really stepping into that their social lives a bit more. So how well do they work together? We might also think about, and we've discussed this lightly, interest in learning mode. What are students curious about? How do they want to show their learning? I want to, like, I only want to write. I don't want to talk, right? We have some students like that. So we might group them together. And then how do they want to learn? How do they want to access new information? We can think about learning interest and mode. Skill progress. This is, I think, one of the more common ones. Where are they in the skill sequence? And then different skill needs as well. So within a specific skill set, and in this example of writing, what are the different skill needs? There might be skill needs on paragraph structure versus grammar. And then also independence readiness. And I think this may have tied in a little bit to Kimberly's question earlier, which students like to tinker and figure things out on their own. I want to name that some students might need a little bit more coaching and support as we're shifting to models like station rotation, right? They might say, you know what, I just want you to, teacher, just stay at the front and tell me what to do. Let me do my work. I don't necessarily want to collaborate with other students. And there might be a degree of support that's needed in order for them to access these new structures that we're utilizing. And so, as I mentioned before, for students who may not demonstrate as much independence readiness, if we're implementing a model such as station rotation, those might be the students that start with us so that we can lay the groundwork and then make sure that they feel supported as they're progressing throughout the online individual station and the collaborative online offline station. We also want to think about how we can consider if we've had any interaction with universal design for learning. You should be familiar with learner variability. We might want to think about planning for learner variability beyond skill level, right? So skill progress, for sure, where are the students in the skills sequence, but then also moving beyond that to learning mindset. What does the student believe about themselves as a learner, right? There might be some students who are really strong academically, but maybe they don't really think that they can learn on their own. What is that student's position towards learning of a specific subject? Math just isn't my subject. They might say that about themselves. So how are we grouping beyond skill level to make sure that students are also expanding their mindset about learning? We also discussed learning interest and mode, so I'm not going to go into that one too much, but social learning, I discussed that one a little bit. Some students prefer learning individually versus cooperatively. Does the student see the value in a group setting? Oh, I just want to do this on my own. I don't really want to be around these other kids, right? That happens sometimes. And so how do we start to develop that muscle where they're ready to work in groups? We might want to make sure that they're starting to work with kids who are on it, who are ready to get to work in a small group so that they can learn those skills of learning cooperatively. And then also considering cultural relevance, right? What culturally informed perspective about learning may the student have? And how is race and culture represented in the curriculum in a way where the student's like, oh, you know what? I think I see myself. I see some scientists that are from where I'm from or that are from my background. And now I feel like this is a subject that I can also do well in. That's important. All right. So as I mentioned before, even though I started with the station rotation, I do want to name that there is still a place for whole class instruction, and it is important. We are not throwing that out. Okay, I want to name that. And I do want to share some strategies that pair very well with whole class instruction. And Nathan introduced us to one of them. So when we're talking about whole class instruction, we're really moving between online and offline work, and the whole class is engaging in the same learning activity, which can then free the teacher up to pull small groups for small group instruction, which you see here with this blue, the teacher's working with a smaller group while the rest of the class might be working on an online activity, or the teacher can pull students one-on-one. right? While the rest of the class is working on a whole group activity. So similar to a lab rotation, in the entire class or whole class rotation, they can rotate between online and offline activities together in a single space while the teacher is working with individual students or in small groups. And a great tool with whole group or whole class rotation is the playlist. So this is an example of how a playlist can look. It can look many different ways, but the overall in the playlist model is you're really taking a day's lesson or a week lesson and you're turning it into a series of activities that students can work through at their own pace. There are also options within the sequence for must do and may do activities. So there's a degree of choice there. And as these students are working through this playlist, you again have the opportunity to check in with students one-on-one or work in small groups while the rest of the class is working through the playlist on their own. So a playlist can combine online and offline activities. And we just want to make sure that I'm driving home the point that they're working through it at their own pace. Now, is there an overall due date? Of course. But there's checkpoints embedded throughout where you're able to see how the students are progressing. So in this specific example, which comes from Catlin Tucker, who is a blended learning, she's pretty well known in the blended learning space. We see that the first activity is to watch a video on how to write an argumentative essay, right? And then after that, there's a screen. I'm sorry, this is actually the screencast that the teacher created, an instructional video on how to write an argumentative essay. And then there's space for notes, and then a spot for the student to know the date that they completed it. The next learning activity, choose a famous speech to read and to analyze. And then they complete a form that's linked there, identifying the claim, evidence, and reasoning analysis for the speech they selected. The next activity, take a hard copy of a sample student essay and use markers to color code different parts of each paragraph. So we see the first two activities were online. They were watching videos, they were looking at a famous speech, and then they completed a form, which they had to access digitally. And in that third activity, for our tactile pen and paper, they're looking at a sample student essay, they're highlighting, they're color coding, right? So it's a mix of online and offline activities. We want to build in choice. And we also want to have a space of accountability, right? Where's the date completed? I'm going to share a sample playlist with you as a resource that you can take with you. And when you see the actual sample, you'll see that there's stop points embedded where they have to check in with the teacher. And we have that built that particular way because we don't want there to be, let's say, 10 activities. Let's say they're doing the next 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks rolls around and not one of those activities are completed, right? So those embedded checkpoints allow us to see how the student is progressing, if there's any questions, if there's any blockers that we can support with to make sure that they're moving along. I'd like to share just a quick example of how a playlist can be utilized in a classroom. This is, I forgot where this school is located, but just so that you can see, sometimes they can be a little hard to grasp unless you see it in action. And once again, I'll also be sharing a template of a playlist with you.
The playlists are a list of activities that they do weekly. So they get one weekly, and they have assignments and then extended activities. So their assignments are kind of like must-dos. They must do those things. And once they finish them, they can move on to the extension activities. And those are more challenging activities, with the exception of if they score 100 on the pretest, then they can skip some of those assignments and then just move straight on to the extensions. So it's kind of motivation for them to focus on that. And then they know if they don't score 100, okay, I need to focus on this area so that I can get to that extension activity.
Okay, so let's check our playlist today and see where you're at. Remember you have either or on Brain Pop and Blend Space. You can either do Brain Pop or you can do your My HRW lesson on Blend Space just as long as you get what done? One of them done, okay? So let's check and see where you're at today. If you completed something, what color are you gonna color your square? Green.
Well, when we get it, I usually do the independent practice first because that's like that is helps me learn it better. And so when I do all the online stuff, it like helps me understand it more. And then usually after I do that, I'll either go to Brain Pop or Dreambox, which is like Dreambox is just like it's really fun actually, and it's like a game, but you're learning at the same time.
So my students get a checklist on a Tuesday when they come in. The first thing on the checklist is whatever we did on Monday together. That way they can automatically check it off. That way they've already got a head start on their checklist because they get to check something off. And then from there, the bolded things throughout the checklist are things that they must do throughout the week. The things that aren't bolded are things that they may do. All right, so Levi's already ahead of the game. He said we've already done notes for the week, so he's checking it off. We did that yesterday. Okay, zombie equations is bolded, right? So you have to do it, but if you're not doing it today, we'll do it some other time. Okay, you'll do it one of the other days this week. Brain Pop, not bolded. Is it required? Okay, HRW, is it bold? Required? Okay, I don't care which one of the three you do this week, but one of them needs to be done. Okay, math games, it's not bold right now, but will it be due by the end of the 6 weeks? Probably, yes. Yeah. Okay. Everybody good on what they're going to do today? This week, I bolded My HRW, but then on the instead of My HRW were the 3 assignments that they have for the entire 6 weeks that are already up. And I told they don't, they have to have them done by the end of the 6 weeks, but they didn't have to do them in order. So they got to choose which one of the assignments they did for the week, as long as they got one of them done this week.
I forgot to ask, like I did with stations, who's used playlist already? I know that there's some wisdom in this room already. I know Nathan has, but who else? Put a 1 in the chat if you've already tinkered with using playlists in your classroom or some version of it. Anyone? Okay. Yeah, this blended learning model is not as popular. So maybe not. Okay. All right. Well, great. I'm excited that I get to share a tool with you then. So what we're going to do now, I don't think we can use the entire 10 minutes, but I want to share something with you. Oh, wait a minute. Did I move too fast? Someone was responding in the chat. I've always called it a layered curriculum. Okay. Yes. Yes, Leah, thank you for raising that point, because sometimes we're utilizing these strategies and just calling them different names, and we're already doing it. So layered curriculum, if it's available to you and you'd like to speak to it a little bit more, please feel free to unmic. No pressure there though, but thank you for sharing.
So the only difference I see between the playlist and the layered curriculum is that the layered curriculum is specifically designed that each layer they move increases the DOK and rigor level. So the first layer starts with basic recall, and then by the end, they're doing the extended projects.
Love it.
Each step along the way is optional because each step along the way, they're getting those skills. So it's a menu with different layers that by the time they're done, they earn a certain number of points.
Okay.
Doing the activities they choose to do.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for highlighting that. And you know what, Talia, I hope I'm saying your name correctly. In best practice, when it comes to designing playlists, the learning activities should be increasing in that DOK difficulty. Yeah, so thank you for naming that. What I'd like to do now, let me make sure I have time to share this. Okay, so I'm just going to talk us through it first, and then I'm going to make sure that I share this in the chat. So this is just a document, a Google Doc that has some of the high level points from today's workshop. So there's a space for you to think about some grouping strategies that you might want to implement this school year, some grouping considerations based on the objective, the students that you would have in the particular group, remembering that groups are going to be dynamic, so the members of the group are going to change. And then also the instructional approach that you might want to utilize. Linked here are some of the different ways that we can group students that we talked about. You also have just like a little station planning grid here where you can think through what you might want to do in the teacher station, the objective, the materials, the activity description, and the assessment, in the digital station, in the offline or collaborative station, and an optional fourth station. And then finally, here is a template that you can use if you want to experiment with creating playlists, where it's very similar to the one that I shared in the deck, where you have the activity set, the directions, a space for students to jot their learning notes, and even some linked evidence of completion, as well as the completion date. You'll see here that there's stopping points that are embedded where the student has to check in with you before they progress through the rest of the learning activities. Okay, and also linked here is, I think it's an additional planning document. I don't think you need it, but this is what I want to share with you. So let me just drop this in the chat so that you can explore it. And we're not going to take a full 10 minutes. It just takes 5 minutes so you can look over it. And what I invite you to do is just to make a copy by going to File, drop down that third option, make a copy, so that you can have a copy that you can write in for yourself. Okay, so let's just take 5 minutes to explore this resource and even see if you'd like to start planning, and we'll come back and wrap up together. How does that sound? Hope it's all right for you all. Think so? See some head nods? All right, great. And please feel free to drop any questions that you may have in the chat or ask them aloud. Oops. Let's see. Seeing most folks in there, let me know if you're having any trouble accessing it. And I need to find something for elementary teachers. Hang on, I haven't forgotten about you. Here we go. Okay, I hope this isn't going to be overwhelming, but here's another resource that we have, all things playlists, that I just dropped in the chat. And you'll find some things from my elementary teachers that are on there as well. And this is what I just shared in the chat. So you'll see resources grouped. If you just want to learn more about playlists, weekly planning templates recommended for K through 8s, high school, by content area, general playlist, including the one one similar to the one that I shared, and then playlist examples. So there's a lot there. I don't want you to feel overwhelmed, but just so you can have it to take with you. Oh, you're so welcome, Brooke and Tamara and everyone. So just 3 more minutes, you can explore the resources. Ay, ay, ay. And please let me know if you have any questions as you're exploring. All right. Has anyone found any resources that they think might be helpful? Just give a thumbs up or a head nod. I see some head nods. All right. So let's wrap up. So we discussed a lot. We talked about flexible grouping. We defined personalized learning. We explored some structures that can support personalized learning, including station rotation teaching, whole group rotation teaching, and also the playlist model. And we also looked at the various ways that we can group students beyond skill level, including all the ways that are listed here. So just for a quick check-in, when you look at this, what 2 ways are you considering grouping students? You can just drop it in the chat. 1 to 2 ways outside of skill. Independence readiness, yes. Social and interest, group dynamic and learning mindset, cultural relevance, yes. Interest in learning mode and different skill needs. Yeah. Awesome. And just even thinking about how we can support students who in various points in the spectrum on independence readiness and expanding their learning mindset. Love this. Thank you all. And the last reflection, I want to bring us back to this Nevada Portrait of the Learner thinking about the strategies we discussed, which ones are supporting us and helping students think about how they can grow their learning, how they can build and sustain relationships and community, how they can contribute and make an impact, and how they can thrive. All right. Well, I think we have 1 minute. I don't know if we have enough time to share. So I just want to take the time to say thank you for your participation today. You've been fantastic. I really hope that you were able to walk away with some things that support you this school year, and have a wonderful remainder of the day. Take care, everyone. Nathan, should I toss it back to you?
Yes, please. Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. I always love it when we have these sessions that the teachers get to take back to their classrooms, and this is just absolutely spectacular. Thank you so much for spending your morning with us.
Thank you all.
Of course. So everybody, next session starting at 10:25 will be building student mindset for agency and engagement. Before you leave, please complete the end of session survey for this session that we just had, as well as if you didn't catch it before in the chat, about halfway through, I posted the link to the attendance survey, just in order to make sure you get credit for this session. Does anyone have any questions? All right, perfect. I'll leave you to it. Thank you. Well, people are already rolling on in. Hello, Kim.
Hey, Nathan.
How are you?
Good, good. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you as well. Thank you so much for coming today to present to all of our wonderful teachers. This room's
Yeah.
already filling up. I'm like letting them in as we go.
All right, that's good. I noticed on the schedule we were down at the bottom.
Yeah, we've got like the coolest rooms, I think.
Like it's like prime placement, right? I want to be number one. No, there's quite a turnout I'm hearing for this Saturday session. So it's good to be here.
Yeah, it's absolutely spectacular. Okay, so I just made you a co-host, so you should have all the wonderful rights.
That I
So
will still probably mess up somehow. So
don't even worry about it. So I'm gonna let people in as they come. About halfway through, I'm gonna be posting the attendance form.
okay.
Be able to fill out to get credit. At the end, they're gonna be having the session survey just to give a reflection on how everything went. Do you need to do any breakout rooms?
Nope.
No breakout rooms, okay. And so you should be able to present. Is there anything that you might need or any questions before we get started?
No, I think I'm good to go. I'm just sharing the wrong thing or getting I'm good.
Perfect. Do you want me to introduce you, or would you like to introduce yourself
Um,
to all these people that are listening to us right now? Everyone, this is Kim.
yeah, no, I'm good. I'll jump right in. I'm excited. So no problem. I will definitely jump in here at the 10:25, right?
Yes, and they're still coming in, so
Yeah.
let's give them
Okay.
let's give them 2 minutes, and then we can just hop right into it. Aside from that, it's going to be your show. I'm not going to be cutting you off or anything.
All right. Well, feel free.
Well, some people do that.
Especially, you know what I'm really not that good at? I will love help is if things are in the chat, I get going in the moment and I forget as a presenter, I'm like, oh, we should have the chat open and watch it. So good stuff is happening in the chat. Just let me know.
So we'll do. Perfect.
But I will, for those of the folks that are here, I love it when people come off mute and talk. I know we all do in this Zoom land. It's so nice when we hear other people's voices. So I will invite everyone to do that too. Okay, it is 10:25. Looks like we've got a good room of people here. I'd like to invite you if you would like to. I'm going to not share screen right away if you want to turn your cameras